Navajo County Connection. I'm Catrina Jenkins. Filling in this week is your host. With me today is Chief Morgan from Pinetop Fire.
Good afternoon, Catrina.
Thank you for being here. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
So today we want to talk about Firewise and preparedness for fire season.
Yes.
So tell me what Firewise means to you, Chief.
Well, it is a kind of a national message that gets homeowners engaged in actually protecting their own property from the dangers of wildfire in areas such as the White Mountains, generally called the WUI, Wildland Urban Interface.
Right.
So when we begin to develop and have forest in, around, or adjacent to our communities, we've got to learn to live with wildfire. It's going to be part of our natural ecosystem, and Firewise is a methodology that we can employ to help reduce that risk to our individual property. So
Nice.
it gets the homeowner engaged in having that responsibility for themselves.
So, and I know in our community, because we are in a wildland urban interface up here, what are some of the easy things that homeowners can do first, right off the bat?
Well, vegetation management is the easiest thing. And every spring, it's taking care of what we call the fine fuels, the needle cast, the leaf litter, getting that stuff up and off the ground so that it doesn't help fire communicate to their home.
Right.
Or decks or things like that. The next thing would be is to work on ladder fuels in the zones. And we have 3 Firewise zones that we usually kind of address and prescribe to and educate homeowners on how they can, again, take care of their own property. So the first zone is at 0 to 5 feet or immediate zone. And that's really where we want to pay particular attention, because that's the adjoining zone to the home or any of their outbuildings or things like that. So
Right.
That's the one that we're going to focus on first, again, looking at those fine fuels, ladder fuels, and tree density.
Okay.
In the second zone, which is the 5 foot to 30 foot.
Okay. So does that mean clearing out each and every tree, bush, and leaf in the immediate and
No,
zone, or what does that mean?
No, Firewise is not a clear cutting. It is, like many of our property owners, we enjoy trees, and they have a very needed purpose, not just for our home, but our little microforests that are on our properties. And but we need to have proper spacing, and that proper spacing is going to give us the defendable space necessary to protect their homes. So we're looking at opening the canopy. Generally in that first and second zone, we're looking at 12-foot spacing between the canopies.
Okay.
To use a little more technical term, we look at a target of what we call 80 basal area per acre per square foot. That's a long formula for folks to try and figure out. So 12-foot spacing is generally what we try to teach the homeowners. And if there's ever any doubt, they can call the fire department. We'll come out and help them with an assessment to give them that idea of what it should properly look like.
Right. I just wanted our folks to know that we're not talking about you have to clear cut everything and there's no trees allowed. That's absolutely not true anymore.
That's correct.
And so another good thing that we've talked about as far as Firewise that I've heard over the last couple of months is making sure to put a screen up around those deck spaces or overhangs and stuff. Can you tell me more about some of that kind of things?
Yeah, and I think if folks just took a nice little stroll around their property, they would recognize that there's collection points. And generally, we call them little eddies, where a little kind of whirl of wind collects, and that's where our fine fuels will collect as well. Mm-hmm. So wherever you see this pile of leaf litter or needle cast, that's usually an area that we want to, again, pay attention to. Commonly, it's under the decks.
Right.
So we like to use some sort of lattice with a screen of at least 1/4 inch to 1/8 inch behind that lattice, and that prevents that leaf litter and needle cast from getting under the deck. So that when we have that wildland fire, and it's not if, it's when,
right.
And the amount of embers that are cast in front of that fire front, it's going to eliminate or reduce some of the potential for non-combustibles to be ignited underneath the deck and then again catch the home on fire and then create what we call structure to structure ignition. So there's a big cycle that we're trying to break there by doing things like lattice and screening.
So another one that I've always talked about is, especially this time of year when we're having warmer temperatures and we don't need our fireplaces so much, is move those wood piles away from the home, because that's another ignition point, right?
It is. So our fire-wise, and our recommendation is get your, if possible, as far away from the home, but we like 30 feet. 30 feet's really kind of the magic number, so that if ember cast does get in there and ignite your firewood pile on fire, the radiant heat isn't enough to catch adjacent combustibles on fire, again protecting the home.
Okay. So anything else, like what else do we need to move away or be aware of in our backyards?
Well, we haven't talked about the roofs. That's another point of where needle cast in particular collects, or if you've got oaks close to your roof line, we'll get a lot of leaf litter there as well. So you're going to want to get up on the roof and or hire a contractor, particularly if you're elderly, and that's not something that you know, we certainly don't want you to get injured doing something that would put you at risk. But we want the roofs cleaned as well as the gutters, and get that leaf litter and needle cast off of those areas. Voids are where two sections of the roof come together, and a lot of times on the back of a fireplace, we'll have collection points. So yeah, again, the places to pay particular attention to, and in the spring, get that off. For most folks, here in the White Mountains, we've been accustomed to telling folks by the end of May, have these things done. And what we're experiencing outside of this year is there's certainly something going on with climate. And it's getting warmer earlier, which means we should get our spring cleaning done earlier.
Exactly. Don't wait till it's too late and we're in fire restrictions and we can't get some of those things taken care of, right?
Right. Preparedness is early, not at the point when we're actually into the restrictive portions of the season, and now people are scrambling to get things taken care of.
And you brought up a good point. This year we're having a great year and we are so blessed, but what does that mean? What does that ignite in your head? Do you have any concerns about this year?
Well, I can tell you from the fire service, and that includes all of the area fire departments, the U.S. Forest Service, and our Division of Forestry and Fire Management, our state fire service. We are breathing a little easier here in the White Mountains. And most folks that have lived here for any significant length of time probably recognize that it's been at least 10 years since we've had a winter and a spring like this. In fact, we have unprecedented precipitation and moisture, which is good for our forest and our microforest. But this is not a time to let our guard down, because this is cyclical, and we know even with our last storm, we had some significant winds. With those winds, it doesn't take long for our fine fuels to begin to dry out and start seeing a reduction of moisture in the forests that are on our properties. Which again, we will have a fire season, but is it going to be like we've seen in the past this year? Likely not, which is a good thing. But this gives us time to prepare and get ready for that next cycle, because it's coming.
So one of the things I wanted to chat with you about is being prepared, having a kit, having those documents on hand. We've been out in the public, my staff and I, and we hand out these bags that's emergency documents, and it's a list of important things that you want to have on hand if you are evacuated in a fire. Because again, like you said, it's not a matter of if, it's when. We are going to have to start thinking in those terms long throughout the year, because fire is always a risk up here. We have some other handouts that, you know, if you've never seen me or my staff out in the public, we're happy to talk about, and you can easily find these things online as well. If you go to the NavajoCountyAZ.gov website, we have a lot of this stuff already posted on our social media. It's there. So we're going to be doing some more talking about a preparedness kit, just a 72-hour kit that you can have a few simple things in So you grab and go in case we do have to evacuate, because like you said, we are going to have a fire season. It's a little delayed, and we are happy about that.
Yes.
Is there any kind of planning that you would say folks need to do for their homes or their yards?
Well, again, focusing on the kit that you just talked about, they shouldn't be preparing that when they're getting the pre-evacuation or evacuation order. It's something that our folks should have done today. That 72-hour go bag, that preparedness bag, those things, or at least have assignments, get your family involved and have those things ready.
Exactly.
For us, though, there is an opportunity for folks to reduce some of the ignition dangers on their property. So if you've got combustible outdoor furniture on your deck, that's the point when you need to get that off your deck. Reduce those things that are going to, again, ignite through ember cast and then communicate radiant heat to the structure, and now we have a structure fire, not so much because you're dealing with a crown fire, but because of ember cast igniting combustibles on the decks. So flower beds, those are another thing that if you've got those on your deck, get those off of there. Barbecue grills, even though the propane cylinder itself is sealed, and that's not necessarily the danger from the ember cast, it's if the deck ignites, that's going to be enough heat that causes the cylinder itself to relieve, and now we've got a propane fire on top of the structure fire that we're having to deal with. And if that cylinder gets to a point where it can't relieve the pressure fast enough, it becomes an explosive device, which complicates things for us in a wildfire firefighting suppression activity. So
we want our folks to be what we say as ready, because we talk about ready, set, go all the time.
Correct.
So ready is year round.
Absolutely.
Be prepared, have your kit, have your yard ready, whether you're fall or summer. There are certain things, like you said, it's cyclical, so we want everybody to be ready 365 days a year. So then the next step is set, and like you said, if something is coming along, you want to have that stuff ready and planned out so that you can grab it and go, right?
That's correct.
One of the ways folks hopefully have heard about to hear the news if something's going on is our alert system through Ready Navajo County. We have real easy website to go through, and you can register yourself, or you can call our office and we'll help set people up in that system. It's navajocountyaz.gov/ready, and it'll take you right to the link with some more information so you can read about it. We don't send out junk mail or we're no harassing phone calls or anything like that. We only send out emergency alerts. So whether it's a fire or a missing person or flood or something man-made, you never know. But that's one good way for people to get that information. We have a lot of other ways. You guys have a website, right?
We do.
Social media?
Social media, yep. And something key about social media is I know that's a popular thing for folks to look at for messaging, but make sure that the social media messaging that you're listening to is a validated social media. I can't tell you how often we get incorrect messaging, and it may not be intentional. We have well-meaning people that are trying to get the message out there as well, but it may not be a validated source, so it's inaccurate. And when we're in a time of crisis, we need to have organized crisis as opposed to disorganized crisis.
Yeah, we don't need to incite panic.
Correct.
So the vetted sources would be the county pages, your page, any of the city pages, because we're only going to put out information that's coming from folks like yourself or the police chiefs, our sheriff's office, stuff like that. So
our National Weather Service.
National Weather Service, valid, true, dedicated sources to releasing the truth. So,
and as you mentioned, our PIOs are generally communicating with the incident management team, so the information is coming right from the incident management team and has been vetted and is again being communicated as a valid source.
So one thing I wanted to touch on is the go part of Ready, Set, Go. If we do have an evacuation, we need folks to go. And we're going to push that information out through any and all means, radio, door-to-door communication, our alert system, of course. But don't wait, because a lot of times people think there might be a secondary alert system or something else, or they have a little extra time. We want folks to know when we say go, it's time to go.
Absolutely, and you know, we learn lessons from tragedy, unfortunately, and we are learning. Seems to be more often nowadays that these lessons are becoming just so forefront in the media. Our most recent example is the Paradise Fire in California, and folks, that is us. The fuel type was very similar. Conditions were very similar in terms of the fuel loading that we have here in our community. And they had a good plan. They had a very good evacuation plan. Theirs was zoned out, and they were getting folks to evacuate by zones. And folks didn't understand that, didn't know what their evacuation routes were. And as a result, lives were lost. We saw this in the Waldo Canyon fire as well. We saw this in Canada in the Fort McMurray fire, where folks didn't heed the warnings, didn't know what their evacuation routes were, and got trapped right in the middle of a firestorm. So we're hoping to eliminate those things when that messaging gets out.
And sometimes, you know, talking about evacuation routes, sometimes those are set because of the incident, and they're not already preset. So just making sure folks understand they're going to have to listen and watch for those messages and pay attention to our public safety officials. They're going to tell you where to go and which is the best way to get there, and don't ignore them and try to go around, because you could run into the fire trucks that are trying to help put out the fire and make another incident happen.
And I think for our second home property owners that live here, they probably have a normal route that they come and visit their second home, and they haven't really thought about alternative exit routes, and not recognizing that their normal route to get here to the White Mountains may be closed off, particularly 260 and 60. So they may have to look at a longer route to get away from the wildfire that's approaching.
And if we are in an evacuation, hopefully folks will know that's not the time to come check on your property.
That's correct. Yeah.
So tell me some more. What else do we have coming up this summer?
Well, FireWise is a dynamic process, and we want to educate our community about that. In fact, we're still looking at growing our community in terms of becoming FireWise USA designated.
That's right.
In 2015, we had 1 here in the White Mountains. Today we have 6, and we have 14 more in the pipeline. So by the end of 2019, we hope to have 20 communities here in the White Mountains that are FireWise designated, meaning that homeowners are taking this responsibility on themselves. They understand the risk, and they're partnering with the various fire departments to reduce the risk.
Right.
But we want to continue to get that message out and have that learning opportunity. So on July 20th at Blue Ridge Elementary School, we're doing our annual White Mountain Community FireWise Block Party. So we're going to have a food, we're going to have lots of vendors and educational material for folks to learn about how and what FireWise is, what they can do as individual property owners, how they can, if they're in an HOA, how they can encourage their board to become designated, what the advantages of that are. And more importantly, it helps us from an emergency management perspective and from the fire service be competitive in the grants that help reduce the cost to reduce the wildfire risk here in the White Mountains. So the more we can get our communities engaged, the better it is for us in a competitive process for grant dollars as well.
So I'm glad you brought up the grants, because you and I both have that grant that is an incentive to our homeowners, because they get a 90 percent discount on what they do. It comes down to it is a grant, so they do have to pay the costs, but they get reimbursed 90% of those costs. So they are only at the end of the day paying 10% of the cost. This year, you and I both have that grant. We're applying for some more dollars, and we'll keep trying to get those dollars, but it is competitive, and you and I both know that
Yes.
it could get more and more competitive, so folks need to take advantage while they have it, right?
That's correct. And there are other grants other than the 90-10, but the 90-10 is certainly the most lucrative one for the property owner. And as you mentioned, this year alone, there are over 16 applicants just for the state of Arizona that are competing for this 90-10 grant. So obviously for good reason. But there are other grants as well, and those are the bark beetle grant and an AIM grant. There's some pre-disaster mitigation grants, and all of them have various matching homeowner contributions. So regardless of the grant, it's going to help reduce the cost to the homeowner to mitigate their property.
Right.
So folks need to reach out to us, get on that list, because when we have those people that are ready to commit to mitigation, again, it helps us from a competitive process in applying for those grant dollars.
And it gets them engaged in their communities, and that's always a benefit, because we want them to understand they're a partner in this fight.
They are.
This is not just about you and I and what we do, but at the end of the day, it's our homeowners and our communities and our businesses that need to pitch in and help out too. Anything else we need to talk about?
Well, you know, since you brought that up, when we look at our community wildfire protection plan, it actually talks about implementing some of these mitigation standards that are out there and taking advantage of those. In our White Mountains here, and I'm classifying the White Mountains for us, Heber Overguard all the way to Pinetop Lakeside, South Navajo County. And we've got roughly about 87,000 acres of private land that needs to be mitigated. And based off of the funding levels, we're not going to get ahead of that.
Nope.
And it's going to be a continued cycle, especially with our natural history of what wildfire used to look like here in the White Mountains. So on these private lands, we've got to be steadfast and continue to work every year on reducing that wildfire danger, so that when it comes, properties are going to be able to survive on their own without having a fire truck, because as you know, we don't have enough resources to put a fire truck on everybody's property. So a lot of what we're doing here is increasing the survivability and defensibility of that property to stand on its own. So that's critical.
That is critical. And one of the things I wanted to touch on really briefly here, because we're coming to the end of our time together, but we wanted to talk about prescribed fires. That's a big part of our country right now, and I know it's kind of something that we touch on because there are some health implications for some of our folks because of the smoke impacts. What would you say to someone that says, why prescribe fire versus thinning and logging?
Well, again, it was part of our natural ecosystem, and depending on whether you lived in Heber Overguard or Pinetop Lakeside, our landscape is somewhat different, and the historical fire interval was anywhere from 7 to 15 years. And we, by not having that, we've allowed our forest and microforest to overgrow. It reinstills a healthy forest, and in fact, I talk about this quite often. I mean, the average trees per acre were 20 to 30, and we're in the order of 200 to 300 trees per acre now.
Wow.
And that's critical, because that's going to increase the intensity in which the fire burns and contributes to crown fires, much like we saw in the Rodeo Chetasky and Wallow fire. So our folks should key in to those pieces, and when we can get natural prescribed fire on the ground, it's naturally going to thin the forest. It's going to reintroduce nutrients into the forest, allowing those new trees to regenerate, grow healthy, and help us manage forest like it should be, as close to Mother Nature as possible.
Right.
That doesn't mean that we shouldn't mechanically thin, because there's certainly advantages to doing that as well. But when we can incorporate both of those, we really mimic the natural forest setting. And it's going to, again, enhance wildlife, a healthier regrowth, and bring in what we call new grandchildren to take place of those grandparent trees that are eventually going to die off. It's also going to reduce our disease and insect to the trees that are on our microforest. And that's been a big deal this year with the bark beetle.
Big issue this year. I did find out something that through the Firewise block party one year is fire actually helps open some of the seeds from our trees, and they cannot otherwise germinate and take root and grow new trees until they are touched by fire because the shells are so hard.
That's correct.
So when you say healthy forest, it's fire is actually part of Mother Nature. We do try to avoid those devastating catastrophic fires, but like you said, the prescribed fires help make Mother Nature more friendly to our world.
Well, you mentioned health.
Yeah.
Folks that may have respiratory illnesses, when we prescribe fire, it's managed and it's controlled. It doesn't produce the same types of smoke and particulates that we see that are occurring in our dense, overly dense forest fires. So it's actually a little more beneficial to prescribe fire than actually having it occur through a wildfire in a dense forest.
So for our folks that are sensitive to smoke, I just point them to our Navajo County Health District for some more information on what they can do to manage their health.
Yes.
But we are unfortunately already out of time. This went
by
so fast. I'd like to thank you, Chief Morgan, for being our guest today on the Navajo County Connection.
My pleasure.
And we'll see you here next month.